Okay guys, let's go ahead and talk about cosine. So remember, the big deal to remember about cosine, guys, is when you have an input of 0 pi, remember the output, you were 1 to the right of that unit circle, so the output was actually 1 there. So just kind of remember that cosine graphs do not start at the origin, they actually do start at 1. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on with this problem. So the first thing that we're going to do is we are going to amp it up. So our A value is 5. So what we're going to do is we're going to amp up to the high, amp down to the low, and of course draw our midline. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Down low, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And guys, remember, these are dashed lines. It just helps us create good looking graphs, good looking waves, so it's not really a part of the actual sine wave. And remember, after you draw your high and after you draw your low, we're going to go ahead and bold out this midline here. Alright, so we have amped it up. Remember, the next thing we do is we end it, and you end it with a period. So remember, your period is always going to be 2 pi times the reciprocal of the b value. And the b value is 2, so we're going to multiply by a half. So our period is pi. The end of our bell curve, or our curve, is going to be pi. I'm going to put that right at the end. I'm going to maximize all of this graph here. So this is where my final period is going to end. There's pi. And then remember, after that, we're going to figure out these tick marks. Those are called increments. And increments are always the period times 1/4. So it's going to be pi times 1/4. That's a 1. So our increments, our tick marks, are going to go by 4s. So let's space it out here. That's 1, there's 4, there's 2, there's 3. Okay. So here's 1/4, here's 2/4, guys, that's a half. Here's 3/4. There's 4/4, which is a whole. There's your pi. All right, great. Now we're going to go ahead and plot the beginning of the graph. So remember this concept right here. To find the beginning, remember, we're trying to analyze where 0 pi is. And remember, that's the cosine value, guys. And if that's the cosine value, which is 1, you're always going to multiply it by your A value. So the beginning of this graph starts up here at 5. All right, guys. And then remember, from there, we're going to plot our increments. And we have a full period here, and we're going to go low, high, mid, high, whatever, until we reach pi. So we're at high right now, so I'm going to just remind myself this is where I started. And remember, after it's high, it has to drop to the midline, so right here. And after it drops to the midline, it gets low, so right underneath pi over 2, draw a dot. Excuse me. After low, remember, it always goes to the midline. Draw a dot right on 3 pi over 4. And after the mid, it goes up high. So here it is again, right above my end of my period, my pi symbol. Just to kind of make sure, I just want to make sure I have all of my increments. Remember, my increments are fourths. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4. I have done all of my increments. So we're just going to shape this. It almost appears like a parabola, but guys, if you noticed, I kind of drew that. I remembered that it goes on and it continues to make a wave there. So that is our period, and that is the shape for that graph. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at some reflections. Let's go ahead and do cosine first, just because we just did that fresh in our head. So for cosine, it is not going to be high, mid, low, mid for this one, guys, because it's been reflected. So if it's been reflected, remember it's going to be reflected upside down, and we're actually going to have a flip here. So let's go ahead and take a look at our amp. Our A value is 1/2. That's my amp. The negative just reminds me it's a vertical reflection. And actually, that's going to come at the end after we kind of shape out our graph here. So let's amp up to the high value. So remember, when you amp up, this is just a half right here. My high is a half. My low is a half. And I'm just going to bold out this midline because points do go on there. And then that's it. We've amped it up. Remember, now what we're going to do is we're going to end it. So to end it, you're going to take 2 pi and you're going to multiply by the reciprocal of the b value. Guys, we don't have a b value. I mean, technically the b value is 1. Excuse me. So our period is going to be 2 pi. That's going to be right here over at the end. All right, and then let's go ahead and figure out these tick marks. So it's going to be 2 pi times the 4th. So guys, that's going to be 2 pi over 4. I'm going to go ahead and simplify that. 2 pi over 2. So these increments are in halves. So here's pi over 2. Let me just kind of visually space out the rest of them. That's 1 over 2. Here's 2 over 2, which is 1 whole. And then here's 3 pi over 2. And of course, that's 4 over 2. That's just a 2 pi. All right, so we have ended it with our period. We have found our increments. Remember, now what we're going to do is analyze the beginning. And here's where this comes into play. So remember, it's going to begin where 0 pi is. And remember, the cosine for 0 pi was 1, but you always multiply by the a value, and the a value is -1/2. So guys, this is going to start down here. That's the beginning. Remember, we had a reflection. You always multiply your output by the a value. All right, so let's go ahead and graph this thing. So now it's time to graph our increments. Look, I started here low. So if I started here low, this time I go mid, then I go high, then I go back to mid. Let's see, that's 1 increment, 2 increments, 3 increments. I need 1 more increment, so we're going to go back to low. So here's my low value. My mid value is going to be right on that pi over 2. My high value is going to be right above the pi symbol. My mid is going to be 3/2 pi right on the x-axis, and my low value, the end of my period, is right there at 2 pi. So that's going to be the shape of that graph, guys. All right, I've got one more for you, and it's going to be a vertical reflection of your sine value, guys. So let's get started. Let's amp it. So the a value is 4, and I just want to remind myself I do have a vertical reflection on this. Let's amp it up high. Let's amp it down low. And let's draw that midline. All right, so remember, after you amp it, you end it, and you end it with your period. So it's going to be 2 pi times the reciprocal of the b value, guys. The reciprocal of that's 4. So for our period, it is going to end at 8 pi. So if it's going to end at 8 pi, then we know that's going to be the very end of our graph. So I'm going to go way over here and remind myself that's where it ends. All right, and guys, remember after that we have to find our tick marks. We're going to call those increments. So you're going to take 8 pi and you're going to cut it into fourths, so multiply by a fourth. That's going to be 8 over 4, guys. That's going to be 2 pi. So our tick marks are going to be increasing by 2. So here's 2 pi, 4 pi, 6 pi, and of course we already have our 8 pi. All right, great. So remember, from here, this is where you find the beginning. And guys, don't forget, we're back at cosine, or I'm sorry, we're back at sine, by the way. So remember, the beginning, when we had 0 radians, remember the sine value was 0, but guys, you always multiply it by your a value. So when I multiply it by the a value, Guys, remember it's a 0 there. 0 times the A value is still 0. So your sine graphs, even if it's a vertical reflection, it's still going to start there on the origin. However, remember it's being flipped upside down. So if it starts on my mid value, I'm going to switch to green because I like to be consistent. If it starts at the mid value and it's a reflection, it's going to go down low first. After it goes down low, then it's going to go back to the mid, go to your high, and then drop back to your mid. And let's see, that's going to be increment 1, increment 2, increment 3, increment 4. That's perfect. That's all we need. So we got our first point right here. We're going to go to our value, which is low. So we got our mid. Now we're going to drop down to our low, go back to the mid, bring it up high, and go back to the mid. And then shape your curve, guys. And that's going to be a reflection for your sine value, your sine graph.